Welcome, old viewers and new viewers, to another episode of The Dancing Negotiator with Dr. Cheryl Okoli, DHA. This is a show where you learn all about conflict and its resolution strategies. The what, the why, the when, the where, the who. Evidence-based frameworks are introduced, either of mine or those of other experts in the fields. I like to reserve the third Friday of each month for story time. Story time is an analysis of a movie or a drama, what went wrong as it pertained to conflict, or what could have been done better. The last Friday of each month is reserved to have a guest. Now, this guest may or may not be an expert in conflict resolution, but they might have something relevant and salient as it pertains to the theme of the month. So today is guest day, and I'm honored and delighted to have my very first panel of guests. As you may know, the theme of this month has been all about the generation gap theory and conflict in the workplace. So our panel of guests represents the different generations, and they will be discussing with all of us as it pertains to the generation gap theory and conflict in the workplace. But before I introduce them to you via their bio and you meet them live, I would like to highly encourage you to please watch the previous episodes if you haven't already. I highly recommend that you do so, okay? So with not much ado, I am going to introduce a first guest. So the guest I'm going to introduce was not supposed to be here live, but she has wisdom to impart for all of us. This guest is Jeanette Oak. So Jeanette Oak, some of you may know, is an award-winning novelist, and her publishing house is Bethany House Publishers. She is the originator of the Hallmark series, One Calls the Heart. Believe it or not, I grew up reading her books as a teenager. So thank you, Mom, for introducing her books to us. Jeanette Oak is someone that I believe that Canadians really need to get to know more of. She has more of an American audience, but nevertheless, if you're looking for valuable content that is nice and clean for your young adults or children or teenagers, I highly recommend her books. So I have actually met with her a number of times, dined with her, and I've also had the pleasure of communicating with her via email multiple times. So I wanted her to represent the traditionalist for today's panel of guests. So even though she cannot be with us live, I asked her, what word of wisdom would you impart to the generations for your legacy? So I asked her a specific question that all the rest of the panel guests did not have. So the question I asked her was, how can all generations live in harmony and decrease conflict in the workplace and families? Her response was, have we further built division by naming the generations and making each one distinct and different in society's thinking, instead of allowing them to blend naturally with the past and the present, entering the future together? I feel this is a question that deserves consideration. In our present world, are we so involved in packaging that we decide where each individual should fit? One thing I've learned through writing is that though the world around us changes, sometimes rather rapidly, the basic human needs remain the same. We need love, worth, acceptance, recognition, much more than new gadgets. We need individual acceptance of self rather than trying hard to fit society's accepted role for us. Church, home, and family used to provide much of that. Now, most of learning comes from something we can hold in our hands. As good as techie stuff is, it can't give a warm hug. Very profound words indeed, I would say. So now, with not much ado, I'm going to introduce other members that are physically present with us right now. So the first person is Lavon Louis. Lavon Louis is a retired oil and gas professional with almost 40 years of experience in the energy industry, and she brings considerable leadership experience to her present board positions. Her experience includes strategic planning, negotiations, dispute resolution and mediation, collaboration amongst groups, engagement of multiple stakeholders, finance and governance. She holds a Bachelor of Science, a Bachelor of Commerce, and a Master of Business Administration, all from the University of Calgary. a graduate of the Director's Education Program of the Institute of Corporate Directors. Ms. Louie was granted the ICDD designation in 2011. She's a member in good standing of the Institute of Corporate Directors. Next, we have Ogena Odebiatu. She is an IT professional, formerly the business owner of a web design agency. She now works as the technical support lead at the Academy of Culinary Nutrition in Toronto. Next, we have Jennifer Igwe, who is an upcoming fourth undergraduate in the Faculty of Arts, majoring in economics. Throughout her university studies, she took working positions with optometrists in addition to a frontline reception for physicians. She currently sees herself navigating the corporate tech world as an intern. With each role that Jennifer takes on, she is hyper-focused on absorbing the information and acquiring valuable experience. Last but not least, for our live panel guest, we have Maureen Curies, who is an RN and the CEO of Radiant Morning. She is on mission to guide families to decide, document, and discuss their final chapter plans to bring peace to those who live on. Now she facilitates family conversations and leads virtual group workshops to replace drama, trauma, and chaos with ease, calm, and peace. With not much ado, welcome to every guest live here. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. So with not much ado, let us start the questions. So the first question is, what have you noticed in your generation and what do you like and dislike? We can start with Levon.
All right. I will start, and I think some of the characteristics I've noticed about my generation is typically we work hard, we're independent, we're goal-oriented, competitive, and I think we have a sense of self-actualization, which we try to, there's a sense of fairness and equality, equal opportunity, which to me suggests that we have the ability to change. Some of the things that I don't like, I dislike, is we can be set in our ways, which means that we're resistant to change because it always worked for us that way. That if you flip that, we can be seen as being very focused and disciplined. So there's two sides to every coin.
Yes.
So some of those likes and dislikes, depending on the generation that you're talking to, may be positives or negatives.
Well said. Thank you very much for sharing that. And okay, what are your thoughts about the same question?
Hi, everyone. So my generation would be Generation Y, I think, by Dr. Cheryl's classification. We are hardworking, tech savvy, adaptable. I wasn't able to identify any dislikes yet based on my little research I've done. So I guess I'll get to learn more as the discussion unfolds.
Okay. So if I were to ask a quick question, you personally, what do you think are your dislikes about your generation? This is your personal view.
Might be being dependent a lot.
Okay.
On family or friends.
Okay, thank you. And Jennifer.
How would I describe my generation? I would describe us as being very connected and social beings. And I feel that we are also very creative, hardworking, and yes. I would say that what I don't like about our generation has to do with our ability to connect beyond just, the realms of our physical, our parents and friends. I would say it makes us very susceptible to what we see online. So I think in that sense, we can be a little bit stubborn at times, and we sometimes tend to base our self-worth based off of what we see. So I would say we're a generation who compares ourselves to other people as well.
Okay. And just so everyone is clear, what generation do you belong to?
Would I be generation, am I Gen Z or Gen X?
Gen Z.
Okay.
Sure. Okay. Excellent. Thank you for sharing your thoughts there. And Maureen.
Well, I am the tail end of the baby boomer generation. So I don't know, maybe Levon, we're maybe the same generation. You know, I think that our generation, what I see is that we believe hard work. You work hard, you achieve things, that the hard work got us the American dream. You know, we got all the toys, the home, the car, the education, whatever it was to achieve. We worked towards that American dream, which I don't believe really exists like it used to. I like that we're self-confident and we're overall assured. What I don't like is that I think our generation could be a little judgmental. But I think that's probably true of most generations. We think, oh, well, they should do it our way. We know the best way because look at what we've achieved. And that's not always true. I think that we turn a blind eye to some things that are important, like climate change. We're set in our ways, so we don't always take the steps that we should to maybe make the world a better place for future generations. You know, I'll just take recycling for example, but because, oh, you know, that's too hard. And I have these conversations with my friends a lot. And so I think that sometimes we complain about technology, yet we love it. I'm in the medical field, so I look at people of my generation, and as they've gone to more electronic medical records, people of my generation are just struggled with the change, where the younger generation, it was just like second nature to them, and they just like didn't even miss a beat. So I think that we fight technology a little bit, but we are so dependent on it. So that's just some of my thoughts on the baby boomer generation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So along those lines then, what do you think? So going back to Levon, thank you very much, Maureen. What do you think is the cause of conflict across generations?
First, Maureen, I'd like to say, yes, I confirm that, yes, I am in that mid to late baby boomer stage as well. I think across generations, it's the lack of the cause conflict across generations. It's the lack of understanding amongst the generations, and which leads to ineffective communication, and therefore some of the intolerance that you've described, Maureen. Looking for other points of views, you know, this worked for me, so and possibly a different value set. One of the mantras for the baby boomers was that we work to live, whereas that's the generation after us. We live to work. I mean, work was a very big focus for us, and generations that followed us were more shifted to more of a work to live, and I think that's probably a better.
Very, very insightful. Thank you for sharing that, because something I'll quickly add there is when I think of the baby boomers, they were the generation born after the baby boom, after the Second World War. So yeah, so granted, they got to see their parents working very hard. So the mantra you mentioned definitely aligns with that, what was happening in their era. So yeah, thanks. So what are your thoughts about that, okay? What do you think are some conflicts with it across the generations, I guess?
I would say what causes conflict would be respect. So between my generation and the generation before would be, you know, that demand to show respect to the generation before. and also not being able to speak up when you need to. Yeah, those are the two.
Thank you. Thank you. That's right. That's right. So what about you, Jennifer? What are your thoughts? Anything to add to that?
Yes, I actually really like what Levon said. That's exactly what I actually had written down. I believe that at times there tends to be just a general lack of understanding between the two. I do believe at the end of the day, we both want the same thing. We have the same goals and we want the same outcome. But the approach that the older generation and the younger generation take to communicating with each other may differ at times. And I believe that that is what causes conflict at times as well.
Thank you. And Maureen.
Well, I agree with everything. One, I think that, you know, we all think our generation knows the best. We know the best way to do it. And so that we don't listen so well to the younger people. I was in nursing management for a long time, and I saw this, that some of the older staff thought, well, they don't know how to do it because we've done it this way. And so someone was talking about respect, but I think it goes respect for the younger generation and respect for the older generation is very important. We form hasty decisions like, oh, all millennials are, I've heard people say, oh, millennials want to take the easy way out. Well, I have some millennial children and I just am in awe of them and their generation. And I think, wow, you're doing it right. You know, was it, Levon, you said that we live to work. And I look at my son who just started his very first job as a veterinarian. He's 27 and he's talking about work-life balance and how that's so important to him. And I think you've got that right, because so many of us just work. You have to work, you have to provide, you have to have that job, you have to, and I think the younger generation has a much better concept of work-life balance and what they want. So I think that conflict is that we all think our way's the best, and that they don't know or they haven't experienced what we've experienced, and it goes up and down, not just us going down or them coming up. So I think that each generation has so much to offer.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And just real quick, just along the lines of what Oge, Levon, and Jennifer were saying about respect, as you were talking, what came to mind was perhaps there's some cultural influences as well when it comes to respect. And then you, Maureen, highlighted that respect, even amongst the nurses, be it manager and employees, respect is needed across, regardless of hierarchy, right? So yeah, so these are some thoughts to keep in mind when we're dissecting this generation gap theory, because yes, some of you might know this, that it began with the Americans, and across the world, not everyone is cognizant or aware of this theory. So it is one for opening up for discussion for sure. So thank you. So moving on, what do you think are the cause of conflict within your specific generation?
Assuming I'm going to go again.
Yes, please. You got it.
I think within these generations, most of these generations have large bands of age. So with things changing so very quickly, and Cheryl, you mentioned it earlier with technology. You know, technology has changed so quickly that I get frustrated sometimes because some of my peers are slower to adapt. And what do you mean? What do you mean you're not on this? What do you mean we can't do a Zoom call? So I think the conflict within a generation sometimes just it's because of the pace of change that we've got going now, and that some people adapt quicker than others.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you very much. And just for the record, I agree with you about the techie stuff, but I just wanted to quote that was Jeanette Oak I was quoting earlier that she said that. But thank you. I agree with you definitely for sure. So, okay, what are your thoughts within your generation? What are some causes of conflict?
So by that, you mean just my generation and not in comparison with another? Okay. I'd say communication. Different forms of communication, or like different forms of expressing yourself, choice of words being used, so yeah, and all that comes with upbringing, background, environment, so but just being conscious that other people might have other points of view, and having that open mind to hear from other people would, really go a long way in understanding each other and reducing conflicts.
Well said, well said. Thank you. Jennifer.
I believe that I wouldn't really say that my generation suffers from a lot of conflicts with each other. I would say because we are so connected, we're very like social media savvy. My generation, I would say that it causes a lot of different types of people within this generation. So I would say when we look at our parents all across the board, people, we tend to see a lot of similarities, whereas in my generation, people have realized that they can do other things. So I would say that we're very different in terms of personality, job prospects, education, what we see for ourselves in the future. We are very, very different. So I would say it causes more confusion. I would say sometimes we tend to be a little bit confused towards each other. And back to the conflict thing, I do believe that sometimes that can cause a little bit of conflict. You see someone your age that is doing way better or way worse than you, and that can, cause some feelings.
Interesting perspective. Thank you. Maureen, what would you like to add?
Gosh, so many people have said such great things. And I think, so for the baby boomer generation is, I said, overall, I think we're a very confident generation, and that causes conflict because we all think we're right. And, and the tech is the other thing. So, but Levon already talked about that. But I think that we get set in our ways, and we think that our way is the right way. And sometimes we're unwilling to be open-minded to see that there are other ways besides what we think is correct or the one way to do it. And I'm especially noticing that as my kids are growing up. I have, 3 sons all in their mid-20s, and sometime watching the dance that the family does, but thinking that we're right and that's the way to do it. Okay. Causes conflict.
Thank you. So what advice would you give the generation above you and beneath you? I know this might be a little bit different for Jennifer, who's Generation Z, but nevertheless, you can always give advice to the generation above and below us. So start with you, Levon. What are your thoughts about that?
I think this is, it's not just generational, or between generations, it's also within a generation. It's seeking to understand where the other person is coming from, learning to appreciate and benefit from the differences rather than focusing on doing it one way or the other, and my way's the best way. Adapting, or because what sometimes can happen is you can adopt some characteristics from or borrow from the other generations that work better. For example, I love, well, I'm at a different stage now because I'm retired, but I love to be able to work to live, instead of doing it the other way around that I've done my entire career. So be flexible and adaptive, I guess, would be my advice.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay.
I agree with Levon with everything she said. So yeah, just being able to learn from each other. So we can learn from the older generation, we can learn from the younger generation, and like I said before, like being open to see things from another person's point of view. Yeah, and then the younger generation, maybe spare some time for physical contact.
Okay, nice one. Thank you. Okay, Jennifer.
Yes, I completely agree with what the other two ladies have said. Absolutely. I feel that both generations above and below do stand to learn from one another, and understanding and accepting the world we live in today, I believe is very, very important. Um, I feel like having an open mind, especially as the younger generation and older generation, having an open mind is really important. But I also do believe that me being like younger, also understanding that sometimes what older people do have to say is valuable, right? After all, they do have experience, right?
Yeah.
So it's not also understanding that sometimes constructive criticism is essential and important in growing and maturing. And yeah, even though that yes, young people, we do have more to say nowadays in this generation, also understanding that older people do know what they're talking about. So once you can find that middle ground, I feel like that, you know.
Well
Yes.
said, well said. Thank you. And last but not least, Maureen.
Gosh, such great information. My thing is always to come with compassionate curiosity. There's a man that I just love, Kwame Christian, and he's coined that phrase, compassionate curiosity, but ask curious questions of other generations, you know, and then listen, ask the question with curiosity and listen to what they have to say. And I think we learn so much and we gain so much and we grow so much just from listening to others.
Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing that, all of you. So I see we have about 4 minutes left. This has been really wonderful. So before we end this first half, I want to quickly ask you, please, how can viewers contact you? So let's say if you have something you want to broadcast or share, advertise, start with Lavon. What would you like to share with our audience? How they can reach you, or if you have books, things like that.
My website is lavonlouis.com, and there's information there on 3 books that I've authored. Tried to put things into simple from my oil and gas days, but I'm also on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, so people can reach out to me in any of those. I'm a little slower, being baby boomer, I'm a little slower in responding on Facebook and Twitter, but I usually get LinkedIn very quickly.
Okay, thank you. And okay, is there anything you would like to share?
Okay, so you can reach me through my social media platforms. I'm pretty much on all of them: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. And yeah, I'm pretty responsive as well. I do have a website, a personal website, and it's my first name dot last name .com. So it's ogenna.adebatu.com.
Thank you very much. Jennifer?
Yeah, I am on my email the most. So that and LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn is just my first name, last name, and then my email. I'll put it in the chat if anyone does want to reach out to me for any reason.
Wonderful, thank you. And last but not least, Maureen.
Mine, social media, like everyone else. LinkedIn is, I've been doing a lot, but I also have a website, Radiant Morning, and I use that for groups. I do group work with seniors, mostly for end of life planning.
Excellent, thank you very much. So before we end this part, I did promise Denise, who couldn't join us physically, that I will read her words of wisdom for us as well. A little introduction about her. She is so Denise Thymus-Burns is a national medical adjudicator consultant at the Government of Canada. She formerly worked as a regional medical adjudicator for the Canada Pension Plan Disability Program and worked as an ER nurse. As a consultant, Denise leads and/or provides subject matter expertise for the development of procedures for use by the CPP Disability Program staff. She provides specialized medical adjudicator expertise for the knowledge management tool in the area of medical CPP disability. Her words that she wanted to share with all of us regarding this generation gap theory is that the workplace today is very diverse and complex, especially when you factor in multi-generational teams. To mitigate and resolve generation conflict, you must identify it and understand it. Raising awareness of generation differences, attitudes, and values at your workplace through conversations may foster a culture that embraces differences across generations, where employees learn new and more efficient ways of doing things. The pandemic has accelerated the shift to remote work. Hybrid and remote work are now mainstream, and I don't think that's changing. She says, as a Gen Xer, I prefer a more flexible working model. I have young children and I value the flexibility of a hybrid working environment over a return to office. Quite frankly, I'm anxious when I think about only on-site work. How do the different generations feel about this? What role does differences in phases of life play? And on that note, very profound words to ponder on. I thank every one of you, of my live guests, and those who sent in your words of wisdom for spending the time with us on this episode of the Dancing Negotiator with Dr. Cheryl Okoli, DHA. I invite you to join us next time, same place for another episode. But before you leave, I'd like you to remember that you are needed in this world to be a solution. Be the best that you can, and do not rob the world of a precious gem, you. Goodbye, and have a splendid day.